Oh, this is so long! Okay, let's do this. Queen Liffeh slowly stirs within her sprawling bed. She begins to groan softly and roll over. At the door is a loud jarring knock that makes the queen flinch and recoil underneath her silken rainbow sheets. Stagnant silence looms in the air. A second jarring knock cuts through the silence and the queen speaks up from the pillow when the queen speaks up from underneath her pillow. "What do you want?" she says in a muffled voice. From behind the door comes a noise. "It's time to wake up, ma'am." A loud moaning can be heard coming from the Nicolas Cage body pillow cradled in the queen's arm. Oh my god. "Don't be so fucking loud, but come in," she says as she hurls the pillow across the room. The door creaks and swings open. A clattering of plates and dishes appears in the doorway in front of a clean and quaint-looking man. His skin is a vibrant shade of cyan and his outfit is impeccable down to the finest details. His black suit jacket flutters as he swiftly shuffles past the Nicolas Cage body pillow and lying in front of the door and furrows his brow at the obstacle. "I've brought you some food this morning, ma'am," says the man as he sets down a tray on the bedside table. The sunlight catches his bright red vest and contrasting stark white undershirt as his cufflinks briefly sparkle. Wow. Okay. The queen slowly sits up and leans herself upon a mound of differently colored pillows. Blearily blinking awake and wiping her eyes, she gives a wide and deep yawn. Opening only one eye, she glances at the food on the tray and weakly grabs a piece of toast. She eats one bite, blanches, and sets the toast back down. The clean man looks a mixture of worried and surprised. The man quickly begins to stutter and his speech becomes lost. "Is the food bad, ma'am? Can I get you something else, perhaps? Does this not suit you?" I'm sorry, ma'am. I can get you something else to eat if you'd like. Or perhaps you'd like a massage to soothe any ailments. Maybe I could get... The queen groans and the man becomes nervous and abruptly interrupts him with a quick snap. "Shut the fuck up, Vince!" Okay. Vince quickly ceases talking and bows deeply multiple times in an attempt of reconciliation. The magnificent queen takes a deep breath and turns her legs to the edge of the bed and sits up. She slowly stands and sheds her sheets back onto the bed. As the sheets descend onto the bed, her flaccid cock flops down and smacks her inner thigh before nestling between her legs. She gives a great all-over body stretch and cracks a few miscellaneous joints. She prances over to Vince, who has already picked up the body pillow lying by the door and is heading back to the bed. The stark naked queen grabs Vince's face and plants a big wet smooch on his cheek, making him drop the pillow in shock. "Thanks, my lovely friend. You're what makes the bees buzz in this place." Vince turns a brilliant shade of reddish purple and looks sheepishly at his feet. The queen lets out an infectious giggle and mockingly says, "Oh, my Vincey, you seem to have turned into a cherry." She breaks out into a fit of raucous laughter that makes the air in the room seem to vibrate with color. Vince gives an impish grin before quickly realizing and then nervously kicking some dirt into the floor. Vince then realizes there's dirt on the floor and quickly wipes it up. The queen grabs a whoops-berry from the tray and puts it to Vince's face and says, "Eat up. You'll need your strength if you are to keep up with me today," before force-feeding him. Vince's eyes bulge for a brief moment before accepting this force-feeding. Swallowing hard, he replies with a wry, "We should be going now, ma'am." The queen seems to be dancing wistfully around the room and whistling a sprightly jig, ignoring Vince. She takes a flying leap into the air, and upon landing, begins to vigorously shake her naked, thick ass in Vince's general direction. When her brief dancing interlude is over, she takes a moment to catch her breath and wipe some sweat off her face. Standing in front of the wide, arching window in her room, she strokes her chin slowly in thought for a moment or two. The magnificent scene is almost greeting card perfect as Queen Liffeh stands majestically in front of the wide arching windows, pensive and... holy shit.
Pulchritudinous.
The Queen Liffey stands majestically in front of the wide-arching windows, pensive and pulchritudinous. She tells Jeeves to check on the chair behind him, and he obliges. Before he can turn around, the Queen sprints over to her bed and grabs the fluffy lavender pillow and swings it full force at Vince's chest, causing the glistening muscles in her arms to bulge slightly. Whap! The force knocks Vince off his feet and sends him sprawling into the chair behind him. If you're to work for me, don't ever call me ma'am, and stop acting like you're a goddamn slave. Grow a pair, never wear that abhorrent suit again, and don't show your face around me until you do. Okay, Sugar Plum? The Queen flashes a quick, brilliant smile and proceeds to fall to the floor in a fit of maniacal laughter. As Queen Liffey rolls around on the floor, the sunlight glistens off of her alabaster skin, making Vince begin to sweat audibly. How do you sweat audibly? Wiping the tears of laughter from her eyes, she stands and faces Vince. Vince hasn't moved from the chair he is currently crumpled in. Heaving a sigh, Vince rolls himself off the chair and stands up, straightening his clothing and brushing himself off. His eyebrows are heavily furrowed and his eyes slightly narrowed. This makes me uncomfortable, but if you insist, I will correct these quarrels you have with me before I attend to you again. The Queen beams as the dawnlight crests through the window and shines upon her bare flesh, accentuating her curves and toned muscles that ripple across her body. She claps Vince on the shoulder and gives a nod of approval. The Queen stands erect and merely observes Vince as he begins pacing back and forth. Mid-step, Vince stops dead in his tracks as he notices the heavenly glow that surrounds Queen Liffey. Vince inhales sharply as he begins to fidget nervously. A single bead of sweat forms on his brow and slowly drips down the side of his face. The Queen cocks her head curiously and slinks slowly up to Vince, who gulps quietly. Queen Liffey gets uncomfortably close to Vince's face and rolls her tongue around her lips slowly, moistening them ever so slightly. Vince shifts where he stands and adjusts his suit jacket. Queen Liffey rakes her eyes all over Vince's athletic form, making Vince squirm where he stands. "You're looking like a snack," says Liffey, who sprouts a mischievous grin across her face. Starting at his jawline, Liffey drags her warm, moist tongue up the side of his face before retreating and smacking her lips in ecstasy. Vince's eyes bulge at the same moment his pants do. Liffey takes a finger and strokes Vince's chest while she leans in and whispers airily into his ear, "Papi." Vince sheepishly lowers his head and, moving in a purposely fluid moment, unbuttons the top of his suit jacket. From outside the door, you can hear the sharp, crisp sound of a cold one being cracked open with the boys. Queen Liffey emits an almost inaudible moan in reaction. Vince slowly begins to move his hips in a circular motion, mimicking the hours of Shakira videos that he's watched. Vince coyly unbuttons his shirt as he slowly spins around the opposite side of Liffey and gently pushes her into the nearby chair. Queen Liffey's face becomes flushed and her member stands at attention as she licks her forefingers and begins to rub her nipples. Excuse me? Vince slaps her hand in disapproval and removes his shirt, exposing his rippling cyan muscles that cover his body. He begins to swing his shirt above his head and climbs on top of Liffey while gently thrusting his pelvis forward. As if from instinct, dude, this is so long, there's like 10 more paragraphs. As if from instinct, Vince begins to dance on top of Liffey in the chair, his pants struggling to hold his Gargamel and Smurfberry's back. Queen Liffey turns a brilliant shade of crimson all over as Vince gyrates on top of her before shoving his dark side of the moon directly in her face. Unable to contain herself any longer, Liffey abruptly stands, bringing Vince along with her. Setting him down in front of her, with one hand she grabs Vince's ass, and with the other, she grips his hand as she rips him forward until their rippling chests touch. With Liffey taking the lead, they break out into an intense tango of passion. They dance all across the room, leaping over the Nicolas Cage body pillow multiple times. Sweat glistens from both of their chiseled forms as they execute the most intense and sudden tango of their lives. Out of nowhere, Vince rips off his pants and exposes his boxers adorned with tiny anime kittens. his, his Smurf berries swing free as he puffs out his chest and stands tall. Struck by a sudden object of beauty, Queen Liffey squeals with delight and tackles Vince onto a pile of rainbow-colored pillows covering the bed. Oh my god. They wrestle one another for the... Holy fuck!
What are you doing?
Struck by a sudden object of beauty, Queen Liffey squeals with delight and tackles Vince onto a pile of rainbow-colored pillows covering the bed. They wrestle one another for the dominant position. While Vince is distracted, Liffey rips his boxers off and throws them across the room, exposing a hefty yellow banana that sits between two scintillating purple whoops berries on the nearby tray that Vince brought in earlier. Taking advantage of this diversion of attention, Vince slams Liffey down onto the bed and sits on top of her. As Vince sits down, his trousers snake slams into the focus of Liffey's chest. Elegantly veined and bright blue, Liffey gawks at the newfound introduction onto his chest. Vince grabs a whoopsberry and slowly runs his tongue around it in a circular motion before popping it into his mouth, leaning forward and passing the berry to Liffey through a sloppy open-mouthed kiss. The berry pops and oozes every corner of Queen Liffey's mouth. Tears form in Liffey's eyes and drip down her face as the immense flavor and sensation of the whoopsberry strike her. Noticing this, Vince grabs the hefty banana from the tray, slowly unsheaths it, and then stares Liffey in the eyes. The banana slowly enters Vince's mouth and keeps going down. Relaxing his throat, the entire banana slides down his throat and is gone in an instant, swallowed whole. Vince sensually raises both of his eyebrows in Liffey's direction. A green mouse pops its head out of a hole at the bottom of the wall in the corner, looks around, and lets out a squeak that can only be interrupted as yeah, before scattering back home. Queen Liffey begins to breathe heavily and becomes an ever brighter shade of crimson. Please, the Queen moans, as her carnal desires begin to take hold and grips the sheets within her hands. Her back arches slightly, lifting Vince with her briefly. Vince cracks a subtle smile and begins to giggle softly. As Vince lies down onto Liffey, he eases his head down and begins to caress Liffey's pancake nipples with his tongue. Liffey's cock pulsates in response to the dirty deeds being done to her. Vince slowly moves towards the foot of the bed, continuing to cover Liffey's chest in saliva and onto her stomach. Vince draws his name in Liffey's belly button with his tongue, and Liffey lets out a shriek of delight in response. Vince lets his tongue glide down Liffey's body, continuing past his hips and over his pubic hair that's shaved into the word gay. The sunlight coming in from the windows intensifies as the clouds part to grace the room with a golden glow. A small rainbow of colors slowly appears in the room as the sunlight strikes the stained glass windows. Vince takes all of Queen Liffey into his mouth as she lets out a subtle oof. Working wonders that only a person of his skill and depravity could muster. Wait a minute, what? Working wonders that only a person of his skill and depravity could master, Vince executes a flawless technique that he has practiced time and time again on the numerous popsicles he has eaten in his life. Queen Liffey begins to audibly erupt with pleasure as Vince continues to work his magic. Vince begins to tease Liffey and hold her on the edge of white-hot passion. She squirms as she loses control of the situation and becomes desperate for release, but Vince holds strong and keeps her down. He suddenly stops and sits up before picking up Liffey's legs and holding them in the air. There's a sudden crack of thunder outside, and everything goes dark. A sharp inhale of air can be heard, followed by pleasurable groans. The bed begins to creak repeatedly. Primal smells are released into the air and swirl around the room. A sudden shift of sound occurs as the bed creaks heavily and the weight shifts. Boards on the floor squeak, followed by the repetitive groaning of the bed frame. Clawing can be heard on the silky bed sheets as their repetitious creaking becomes more frequent. Loud moaning is heard as well as the soft voices whispering. Cries of pleasure fill the air as thick as humid fog. The creaks continue to increase in frequency until a breakneck speed has been reached. All of it comes to an end as a deep, scratchy voice pierces the silence, signaling an end to the moment. Oh, the curtains close, and everyone claps.